Thank you all so much for being with us. Uh, those of you joining us live, thank you. There's already almost 115 of you in the room, and I know many of you will be watching later, so thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, I want to share really quickly that this event kind of it grew a little bit. It was initially intended to be really tailored and specific to the experiences of doulas in the state of Minnesota, but a lot of people want to know this information and registered from other states. So we're so thankful that you're here. And so I just want to make sure you know that the doulas, the panelists that will be speaking today, will be sharing their experience working in Minnesota, but we'll discuss some of our current advocacy work in the state as well. But this information is great for people anywhere, and so we think that you'll get some great information no matter where you're at, and we'll also make sure to add some resources in our follow-up information that will also pertain to many states beyond Minnesota. So no matter where you're at, thank you for being here with us. Before we begin, a couple of little housekeeping pieces. So again, this program is being recorded along with some follow-up information and resources. We will be sending an email to all of the folks who signed up for this with a link to this recording and those follow-up pieces. So please know you don't have to take notes or memorize any of this. You'll be able to watch this at your leisure. It won't go anywhere. You will see, we want to point out a few pieces about Zoom here. You are able to enable live transcription, which it looks like a few folks already have. You can do that, by clicking the transcription or caption button on the bottom control bar of your Zoom window. And you can turn that on. It's not perfect, but it is very helpful. I utilize it myself. We are also asking that if you have questions that you would like to have our panelists answered, we're hoping to have some time for that at the end, to please utilize the Q&A function, which is also in that bottom panel of your Zoom screen. That Q&A submission allows us to really see that you're sending us a question and make sure we can track it and answer it. The chat feature is also open. You can utilize that if you want to say hi to someone you recognize, if you want to say, yep, I had the same experience, or you want to share an idea. Please feel free to do that in the chat. Be mindful, it can be a little bit distracting if folks are chatting throughout, but we'd love to hear from you. I just want to make sure nobody's questions get lost.
Good afternoon, Joanne. It's Joe Hunsaker from Hospice. Did you call earlier?
Hello. Make sure we are muting ourselves. If you're on, please.
You don't have to apologize. I just simply wanted to call.
Hello. Thank you. So please just be mindful of using the chat, but feel free to say hello in there or send any information you'd like, the Q&A if you have a question you'd like us to follow up with. We also might not get to all of the questions. So again, answers to those questions from the Q&A that are remaining will also be sent in the follow-up email. You can also adjust the view of our speakers a little bit. Where you see us, you can click, there's a little grid video view or thumbnail video view. We have tried to pin our panelists so that they will stay on your screen, but you can click around up there to the top of your video screen to make different arrangements of the panelists on your screen. And then what we will cover, just so that we make sure that everybody's on the same page and prepared for the same thing, in this time together, we'll be discussing the role and scope of work of end-of-life doulas, as well as how to find and connect to an end-of-life doula. And then hopefully, again, we'll have some time for Q&A and some sharing of resources. So just while we get into it, for those of you who maybe are coming because you're a huge fan of one of these three wonderful humans, or you heard about this somewhere and you're not familiar with Compassion and Choices, we are a national nonprofit whose mission is to empower care, expand options, and empower everyone to chart their own end-of-life journey. We do this a lot of different ways, and we do it with the help of incredible volunteers like the panelists who are joining us today. My name is Megan Williams. I am our clinical engagement and education program manager here at Compassion and Choices. I'm also an end-of-life doula, and I'm really, really excited to speak to our panelists today and to share with all of you. I'm also joined by my colleague, Dr. Rebecca Thoman. She fearlessly runs our Minnesota campaign and is also the director of our Doctors for Dignity program. Dr. Thoman will be managing our chat, and then she will also be giving us a lovely update on the legislative session at the end, which we're really excited to hear. And again, overall, we're just really excited and hopeful that today's webinar will provide you with some information about a group of professionals that might be new to you or that you might be curious about, and hopefully give you some tools that support your own autonomy and informed decision making. So thank you again for joining us. Now, our panelists who you came to see, I'm going to ask each of you in this order to introduce yourselves, if you don't mind. Nina.
Thank you. Really appreciate being able to be here today and to be a part of this group. I live in Northeast Minneapolis and serve the Twin City metro area as well as into Wisconsin. Just really pleased to be able to be here and hopefully answer some questions that are burning in your minds. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Gail.
And I'm Gail Gagne, and I live in International Falls, Minnesota. I am excited also to be here and have this opportunity because a lot of people are confused sometimes about what the heck we do. So very excited to do that. And I also function with the county up here, but I also can work in Canada because I'm also a citizen. So I have clients on both sides of the border.
And Barbara.
Hello, I'm Barbara Kraus, and I want to thank Compassion and Choices for sponsoring this webinar, and also you, Megan, for your leadership.
Yeah.
I'm a death midwife based in southeastern Minnesota in Northfield, but I also serve clients south and probably in all directions. Most people know me here in Northfield. My business, In the Thick of Things LLC, offers an umbrella of services. I create rituals for the dying process, offerings in person and remote energy healings, designing unique and end-of-life services, and also facilitating community death education through advanced care directives and medical aid and dying workshops.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And we're going to learn a little bit more about all of you through these questions. What we're going to be doing is asking a few of kind of the most common questions about end-of-life doulas that we receive as an organization and also as doulas. So we're going to have all of our panelists answering them. And again, if you have questions that pop up, please throw them in the Q&A and we will get to them. We might even answer them naturally throughout the course of the session, but that way we can track them and make sure we get back to you. So we're going to start with a really basic one. I don't know how many folks might be asking this, but it's a very good question. What is an end-of-life doula? So I'm going to give kind of a basic description that I utilize, and then I will ask each of our panelists to kind of describe how they describe their work to people, because I find that doulas all have a little bit different flavor and a little bit different focus and might share it differently. So really the general description is that end-of-life doulas are people who provide holistic, non-medical support to people at all stages of life who are seeking to discuss or plan for the end of their lives. And this work is really a complement to medicine and spiritual or faith leaders because death doulas can serve as a part of a comprehensive and knowledgeable support team. So that's kind of the blurb I usually get, but I'd love to know, Gail, I'm going to start with you. How do you explain the work you do? Or how do you describe the work of a doula? What is an end-of-life doula?
Do we have hours? I describe it as I come in to work with a family of someone who's obviously in the throes of an end-of-life situation, and to support and to educate that family in the dying process and what should they expect, it isn't, nothing's written in stone, of course, but to go and educate the family, educate them on how to care for their person, because people feel very overwhelmed by that piece of it. Like, how am I ever I'm not a hospital, blah, blah, blah. But we go in from the non-medical side to go, you know what, at the end of life, we can just help you keep your person comfortable. And so that's really, we become a coach for the family, a coach for the dying person. And I do not charge when I go into someone. I never have. So I say I'm here as a friend of the family now. So I've got some pretty awesome family members now. So
Cool.
that's what I say when I go in.
Thank you. Thank you. And we'll talk a little bit more about price later on
Yeah.
as well, and
Yeah.
charging. Nina, how about you? How do you describe your work to folks?
Well, it's the practical, emotional, and spiritual aspects, and like Gail said, it's a lot of death education. Generally, when I start working with a new client, the first question I ask them is, "What's your greatest fear?" Because I think the more that we know and the more that we can teach, the less fear someone will have. And usually, it comes around that it has to do with their physical body. What's going to happen to my physical body as I'm dying, and what does that look like? And so that's sort of my springboard. And yeah, so that's what I would say.
I
Yeah.
love that. And Barbara, we heard a little bit about your work. I'm going to jump to this next question, which is kind of related to what you all said and really ties into the last one, which is what kind of services can a doula offer? Right? You've talked about, we've heard about, Gail, what you mentioned is really coming in kind of in the throes of potentially a medical crisis or a diagnosis or something. And you mentioned things like comfort and emotional care. And Nina, you obviously as well. But Barbara, when you mentioned your work, you mentioned advanced care planning and logistical planning. So that's certainly a part of the work, right? That you all end up doing is also elements of logistical planning. Things like legacy planning. Do you all do that? I mean, that's also definitely a component of the work. And does anybody have anything around legacy planning, vigil sitting, support to someone that that's kind of a cornerstone of your work that you'd like to share?
I think for
Yeah.
cornerstone is to process client feelings and values. I have 3 words that go through all of my work: revelations, releases, and then remergence. And trying to help clients understand things that are being revealed to them at the time. I think along with what Nina was talking with the fear, that's huge. And then to talk about things that need to be released. What does that look like? How might I do that? And then naming client feelings about death and dying. Because sometimes it gets so large in our memory that we don't know how to deal with it. But if we start naming it, it helps to get a parameter for it. And then finally, sharing what's most important to the person. Besides death care directives, I also work with sharing expectations effectively with conversations and family members and medical staff, because sometimes people get hung up on that too. How do I talk to people? Another cornerstone for me is designing sacred, customized rituals for people, and then also creating celebratory and personalized end-of-life services. And I have to put in a plug here for Compassionate Choices, because once this Minnesota end-of-life option passes, I hope to enroll in training so that it allows me to support those with terminal illness who choose this option.
Thank you for sharing. Nina.
Yeah, so I'm a ceramicist as well, and I love to bring clay into the room, and have done a lot of work with dying patients as well as families in creating legacy pieces. And the beauty of having something that they can touch with their hands and work with their hands is that you're bringing in a third thing, and so people are generally more willing to have a conversation because they're not looking right at you, they're looking at their hands as their hands are making something. And so it's really you bring that anxiety level down because now there's something to do. And And then it's a collaborative effort. So oftentimes the patient will have died before they get their things back. So what I do is I bring them here to my studio, I fire them, and then I go ahead and glaze them, and then do a hard fire. So the collaborative aspect is that I look at the piece and determine really what does this piece want as far as color and depth, and that I love that process, and it's always a surprise for the families to get the pieces back. So it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Nina,
what a
I'm going to
unique
just jump in and say that several
choice.
people are having a challenge hearing you. So I don't know if you can get a little closer to your mic or, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for letting us know, everyone in the chat.
Disconnect.
Okay. Yeah,
Can you
I
hear
can
me
hear.
now? Or
I
no?
can hear you. Yeah.
Trying to mute it.
Better.
Make sure.
Okay. I'm first. I think I am, yes.
Okay. We'll try that again. Thank you for letting us know.
Okay, I'm back.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Sure. Where we, where do I?
Yeah, no, I think you had
Yeah.
wrapped up, and I was just saying thank you. I think we wrapped up. Can we hear Nina a little bit better? Sorry, I'll ask the chat.
I suppose I need
something.
to say something, huh?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
Again, thank you so much for letting us know. And I actually got this question in the chat, so I'm so thrilled that we're on the right track. How are doulas trained? It's such a great question. I'm going to give just a little bit of a basic overview, and then I'll ask each of our panelists to share a little bit about their experience. So first and foremost, I often say that this doula work is not new. It has a new face and maybe a new name, but this work has been done for forever in every culture, everywhere. There's somebody who's taken on this work of companioning people at the end of life. And so there's not so because of that, kind of the resurgence of it has been relatively new and really over the last 10 years. So there's not a required certification or licensure. We'll actually talk, and some of what we'll send you is kind of information about questions you can ask a potential doula, including around their training as it relates to things that matter to you. So there are many programs, though, training programs within the United States and across the globe, especially over the last 10 years, that offer their own kind of cultivated certification. And these programs are run by trained and established doulas who often have additional background in things like some of the doula programs are run by people who are registered nurses, people who were attorneys, people who are funeral directors. So a lot of times these folks who run some of the larger training programs have some experience that led them into trainings in some of the early doula programs that we've seen in the country. So there's no requirement for training, but there are some special organizations that have kind of come together to establish some standards and goals of care and scope of work. And so those organizations are the National End of Life Doula Alliance and the International End of Life Doula Association. A lot of doulas, myself included, have taken proficiency badges through both of those groups. And so I would love to hear from each of you kind of what your training process has been, what kind of training you've experienced. Just quickly, it doesn't need to be super long. I know that's really hard. But there is a wide variety of training programs, kind of depending on the kind of practice that you want. And I think it's important for consumers and people who are interested in hiring doulas to understand what the options are and what kinds of training someone might have received. So I would love to start with Barbara. Are you cool with starting?
Sure. I was certified as a death midwife, which is like a death doula. And I think, as Megan mentioned earlier, there are lots of different names and phrases that we go by. So I chose the training that went with death midwife. And that happened in 2017 through Earth Traditions. And that's a group based in New Berlin, Wisconsin, a suburb of Milwaukee. And the curriculum was developed and facilitated by a woman named Angie Buchanan, and the training was very much hands-on practice and so forth, because it was part of a sacred earth-based curriculum. It promoted family-directed choice at the end of life, and the website for it is deathmidwife.org. So that's my basic training. Are we going to talk more a little bit later about the NETA proficiency and so forth, or?
We'll be talking about the directory, but you can absolutely talk about the proficiency if you'd like to. Yeah.
Okay. Well, last year I decided to earn an additional credential. I found out about it when I joined the National End of Life Doula Alliance. And up until that point, I had not known about it, and it made a lot of sense to me. So because currently there is no recognized accrediting body that provides standardization of death doula knowledge. So unlike nurses and therapists, there isn't any specific knowledge that people are tested on, and we all ascribe to the same levels. So NETA then decided to create a consistent assessment process, which they call a micro-credential. And it measures death doula competency in 4 core areas: communication, professionalism, technical skills, and values and ethics. And the micro-credential is helpful for people, whether they're families or organizations who are hiring doulas, because they can feel confident and assured that the person who has earned the badge has achieved standardized competence. So I found that to be very helpful.
Thank you, Barbara. Yeah, I mentioned that a little bit earlier. I think it is the closest thing that we have in the work currently to a sort of standardization. And I will say there are large corners of the industry that want to move away from certification and licensure. And so there are folks for whom that isn't crucial for them, and so we want to make sure that people who are interested in pursuing the supportive doulas really know the broad range of options and backgrounds available to give them the care that matches their needs and their values. Nina, do you want to share a little bit about any of your training?
Sure. So I'm a certified spiritual director as well as a certified grief support specialist, which melds into the work really well. I was trained through ANELDA, and then I'm also proficient through NETA. I think that we get our training wherever it is that we get it, whether it's ANELDA or any other program. And the real training for the doulas is really the hands-on work that we do, either through volunteering for a hospice or getting started working with people. And so I think there's the classroom training, or the depending on how hands-on that might be. And I feel that really the work that we really learn and where we really are testing the waters is through volunteering through hospice first, and then going out and doing our own private client work.
Thank you for that. And that is definitely the path that I would say a lot of doulas go through, and a lot of those training plan programs recommend, is that they recommend that folks are joining as volunteers in their local hospices as early as possible. And I think that's absolutely a critical part of the work. I would also say many of us, and you all might agree with me, have kind of done this work on our own. There might be some of you watching this who have companioned people at the end of life many times in your life, and you found yourself in that position. And I think a lot of people come to this work after that experience and don't realize that they already have some training, right? Real life training with loved ones, with family members. And that is impactful and important. When? That's one of the first questions too. When should I consider the services of a doula? We've talked about kind of the end of life, but when and how? When do I decide to talk to someone? Do I have to be at the end of my life to work with a doula? And where would I even start? That's a really good question. Nina, you have one of my favorite responses ever to this first question. Would you mind answering it? Which is, when should I consider the services of an end of life doula? And what would you say to that?
I would say the minute the nudge hits you and it goes through your head.
Mhm. Absolutely,
minute-
100%.
The
Yeah.
minute you ask the question,
The
right? I
minute
mean,
you
there is,
ask the question, yeah.
it's never too early. Do any of you have, I mean, have any of you, you can just raise your hand for this. Have you worked with folks who are not at the end of life? I certainly have, with folks who are not even dealing with the onset of a disease process, who don't have any kind of diagnosis, but maybe want somebody to sit down and go through paperwork with them or talk to them about what it's like to, at the end, what people's experiences are like, what knowledge we have that we can share with them. So really there is no right time. Every time is the right time, I think. And certainly, as a few of you have mentioned, when you're caring, if you're caring for a loved one, and looking for additional support, doulas can be an incredible partner to you in that experience. But if you're looking for one, how? I don't know about any of you, but there are just a million different ways to find people. And when this is something brand new to you, it feels really overwhelming. We mentioned, or Barbara mentioned a little bit, there's also various names for this work. So if you were to just Google end of life doula and your city, you might find someone, but you might not find Barbara, who's an end of life midwife, or you might not find somebody who goes by a death doula. There's a lot of different titles for the word, or for the work, excuse me. So it can be very overwhelming to find someone. But both Nita and Anelda have some great resources, which we're going to share. Gail, can you tell us a little bit about how people can utilize those directories, or kind of what we have available through Nita and Anelda?
Really, it just becomes a search right now because we're a very disorganized, organized group, if you know what I mean. Like I'm the only person up where I live, so it's just word of mouth up here. I don't need to advertise that kind of thing. But I think in a bigger center, it is a struggle because, as you say, everyone's tagged themselves differently, and yeah.
Yeah, so using those directories, I think all of us are are on them, but the National End of Life Doula Alliance has a directory of doulas that you can search for by state, and also by name. And Inelda also has a directory of doulas who've registered with them. And so those are kind of the main places, which again, we will share that in the follow-up email, but you can certainly look it up online right now if you want to, that they have these directories, which are really at this point the closest, most consistent thing we have, because Google searches can be so challenging. Social media is also a great option. There are a lot of doulas on Instagram and Facebook sharing their work. But really looking at Anelda and Nita can be great ways to find someone, even if, you know, like Gail might be the only person in her area, but she might also know of other people who might not be on the directory, or other folks who are doing similar or supportive work that aren't listed there. And she has a whole network of people. So starting with those directories is a really nice way to safely identify people who have done some sort of training and put themselves out there as ready to receive clients, which I think is a really valuable resource.
Megan, if I can add to that.
Please. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm one of the founders of the Minnesota Death Collaborative, and that is a great place to find professional members that are doing the work. And it's not just end-of-life doulas, it's also celebrants, ritualists, people that are green burial professionals, people that are funeral directors, pretty much photographers, funeral photographers. It's a great space where you can just even start to look at what might I need and how can I get there. And with the professional membership, the photo of the person is there, as well as their website and phone number and brief description. So very helpful.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for that very, very much.
I'd also say that senior groups, if you can connect with them, we have a group in town called 50 North, And so just going there and letting people who work with programs know your availability and what you do. A lot of times it's word of mouth, but that works really well. Also, if you decide that you're going to do any kind of death education work, people can get your name that way, and we'll often stop after the class and say, well, what else do you do, or could you recommend something? And so that's another way to become known in your area.
Right. So folks who are looking for a doula, certainly looking for death cafes, which is a very common kind of community education space, or end of life planning. You might see those in your libraries or in community centers in your area. That's usually a great place to find somebody who's doing the work, who can direct you to someone else if you're looking to hire someone or find someone. Thank you. And we also got this question in the chat, so I'm really glad that we can talk about it, is kind of, can end-of-life doulas support people who are receiving hospice services? How do they work together? How do they balance? And I'll just say, I think it's going to differ greatly depending on, where you live. It's still a very new relationship. But absolutely, you can still be receiving, hospice support and the support of a doula. I would love to start with Nina. Do you want to speak a little bit to this? Would you feel comfortable starting?
Yeah.
Perfect.
So I helped to found a program at Shalom Hospice, and what we found initially was that there was a little bit of pushback from the medical staff because they were afraid that doulas were going to take over their jobs, and so it was a lot of education on what do doulas do. And once we were able to kind of break that barrier and kind of get over that hurdle, we have been getting we now get referrals from the RNs on patients. They'll say, so and so really could use a doula. Can we get one in there? And that program, we started with 5 doulas, and we're up almost to 20 at this point. So it's what's beautiful about that is that we really are collaborative with the medical staff. We're invited to be in the interdisciplinary group meetings at times. The doulas are invited into that, and Shalom is ramping up their practice with the doulas and with staff so that everyone is really on the same page on patients. So there's a lot of interaction between doulas and the hospice medical staff. And I think that it's that collaborative effort, and also more eyes on the patient, and a willingness to work together. So yeah, it's been great.
Thank you. Thank you. Gail, did you want to share?
It's a loaded question for me. Our hospice is pulling out of town. So up until now, I have worked well with them. I used to be the director of hospice for the county years ago. And then a big conglomerate came in and took it over, and now they're leaving because it wasn't lucrative enough. So if you phone our county right now and they say, what's your hospice service like? They say, phone Gail Gagne. Gail's on a mission now to try to get things organized, but my relationship with them was fine. I ran into the same kind of thing because I am a nurse. They thought, oh, you're going to steal the work we do there. And I absolutely 1,000% had to say, I do not go in and do nursing function. I'm there to support. But what I offer that they can't is 24-hour vigils and being on call constantly and all those pieces of it. And that worked very nicely once they recognized I wasn't going to be a threat. And now here we are. So
well, we're all thinking good Gail organization thoughts for sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Barbara, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I was going to say, I've been asked by families to set sacred space in different hospices here in town. And that's a completely different thing from actually doing any kind of services along with the hospice staff. But they were very curious and wanted to know what it was about, how do you do it? And they could see that it might offer comfort to not only the client, but also to the client's family. So I think just educating, showing rather than telling, I think works really well. And I just see it expanding, and I see people opening to it more and more.
Wonderful. I will also say that the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization now has a end-of-life doula council, which I'm a member of this year. So I think that that also speaks highly of the investment of hospices into the work of doulas. And so I want to make sure people know that that can be a partnered experience. And I think what you said, Gail, was so spot on, that we have different time available to us doing this work than the healthcare staff is often able to, for financial and all sorts of other constraints.
And for
Um,
a family to be able to say, yeah, I can give you of that time, becomes so calming for them, where it isn't regulated, and there's a freedom involved with being able to do that. And I think that's what families appreciate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think also serving is a little bit of a bridge, right? If we
Mhm.
are also there and we also have eyes on like Aunt Sue, and we can share that information with the hospice team when they show up, like that's a great way for everybody to be on the same page and have information quickly, which is really great for everybody
And
involved.
Megan, the other piece that I think is coming out more and more is that not all people who are dying require skilled nursing care.
Mm-hmm.
Some people do, but not everyone. So that's where we fill that role, where a skilled nurse doesn't necessarily need to be in that home because they're doing fine and they're settled, And what I find is I have a working relationship with individual doctors, each person's doctor, not just a hospice doctor, especially now. But that's worked beautifully because these doctors are like, thank you. Yes, I can provide a kit for you that will help that family. So that I think, like Barbara said, it's really cutting edge. And I think it's only going to get bigger, our roles. I really do.
Absolutely. And with leaders like Nina starting them too. I mean, it's happening. It's very exciting. Also asked in the Q&A, which I'm glad to share, is, generally how much do death doulas charge? Does insurance cover this? Very common question. So I will solidly say that there's no good answer to this, because there is no, I don't think I've ever seen a general pricing. As we've heard, some folks volunteer their services as doulas. Some people charge by the hour. Some people charge in kind of a package situation. And insurance does not cover this kind of care. The kind of caveat to that, of course, is if someone is receiving services at a hospice that utilizes the care of doulas, that's a different process, because it's part of the service being provided by the hospice. But for now, there's really not a great general pricing situation. But these are all individual contracts between a person and the doula, or someone's family member and the doula. So there's a lot of intricacies to it, but it's very different depending on also the services that are being provided. Do any of you have anything that you want to share? I know we wanted to go over that one kind of quick, but I wanted to make sure
I
if you
will,
want to add.
Megan.
Yeah, please.
I decided to do some research just to see what was out there, because it's been a while since I've done this on any kind of charging for this work. And I found a group, ziprecruiter.com, in which they rank the states, and Minnesota ranks 30 out of 50 states for salaries for doulas. And the average hourly wage is $24, with some rates as high as 150. And again, experience and location are factors. Rural tending to be less money per hour than in the city. And then I thought, well, what else is out here? Doulatrainingguide.com. It's a site that shows average hourly doula compensation by state. And Minnesota weighs in at $35 an hour. And the range among all the states is $28 to $50 an hour. I think it's Hawaii and New York who charge $50. Many doulas continue to offer sliding scale fees or take on pro bono clients. So it's really all over the map, but I thought, oh, this is interesting. Again, basically, you know, $24 to $35 an hour in our state. But if you have more proficiency or possibly more experience with it, certainly a higher fee per hour is in line.
Yeah, and I
Thank you.
guess I would say that, you know, here in the Twin Cities, I think the average is around 75 an hour. And for my own practice, I also do volunteer, and I also do pro bono. And I also do sliding scale. I do not want finances to be a barrier to service, and I think that that's really important and part of giving back to community and to folks that maybe wouldn't be able to get services otherwise. So.
Thank you. Thank you all for adding that. I appreciate that. This is a kind of an important one, and we will, again, this will be part of what we send out, is kind of some answers to this written out. What are, you know, if somebody says, okay, I kind of get that you help people with planning, you help people with holding space, having conversations, you sit active vigil, maybe I want to work with a doula. How do I know that somebody's the right person for me? Where do I start? Maybe I do go on Nita or Anelda and I find someone. What are the questions I can ask them when I meet with them?
I'd like to say something about that
Yeah,
first.
please.
I think it really begins in your own mind. I think rather than jumping out, look inside of yourself and say, what do you want for care before you make contact with anyone? Do you want general guidance? Or perhaps you've already decided to hire a doula, but you need more details. What kind of care are you expecting? Hands-on type of thing with family involvement, or what I call the view from afar. And are there any certain criteria or must-haves that you're looking for? Do you want your doula or midwife to live locally, to be religious in a certain areas, to have 24/7 availability, a sense of humor? I mean, really, you know, to know what you're looking for, I think is the best place to start. And then you're ready to contact someone like Gail or Nina or me and share some of those questions that were asked earlier on. Why do you do this work? What services do you focus on? Pricing, that kind of thing. I came up with one other question though. What is your best or most challenging experience that you've had as a doula or a midwife? And what did you learn from it? I think that would be a prime question to ask.
Thank you. I love that question. That's a great question. Did either of you, I don't want to cut either of you off. Gail. Did Gail or Nina, did you want to share anything about this or any other questions?
Yeah, I think it's religiosity or spirituality is generally really important to people, and lack there, you know, and affiliation thereof. So if someone's agnostic or atheist, they generally want to know, what am I? And so what I tell them the truth. And then I also let them know that our jobs as doulas is to meet them where they're at. So it's not about, it's about, are we a good fit personality wise? And do you think you can work with me? And if you do, the other things don't, you know, that doesn't necessarily matter. So I did have a client that I was going to see yesterday, and they're Buddhist, and they wanted a Buddhist. They decided finally, because I told them I'm interfaith, and in the last minute yesterday morning, they contacted me and said, we really think we want a Buddhist doula. I said, cool, I'll go ahead and call. And I know somebody that I can call, and they're a Buddhist doula, and I put them in contact with each other, and stepped away and let them go from there. So I think for some people it is really important, and for other people they just want to know where you're at. So
Absolutely. Thank you.
When you
Thank
ask about like an experience that sticks with you, for me, it was one of faith. And this woman and her husband made it clear in no uncertain terms did they need spiritual guidance. They didn't want it. You're born, you die, you're done. And so we were in the thick of the vigil with this particular woman, and it was the day before she died. And through her haze, she said, "Gail, will you pray with me?" Well, I thought the husband was going to drop his teeth. Like it was, like he just went, "Where did that come from?" I said, "I don't know, but I'm going to pray with her." So, that for me was super impactful. And I've never forgotten that when dealing with anyone in terms of how their faith is based or, yeah, it was pretty cool.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And we had some questions about that already. So I'm really glad you just spoke to that. Thank you all so much for that. I'm gonna skip us to our Q&A because we're basically there and we have a few questions that I'm really excited to ask you all. So I'm gonna jump to that. I know we got a few of these. But someone asked, and again, to those of you who thank you so much for putting your questions in here so we won't lose them. Any of these that we don't get to today, we will answer in the follow-up email. But we got a great question that I'd love to ask is, can one of you or a few of you talk about kind of a day in your work when someone is close to end of life? What might that look like? What kind of care might that be? What might you be doing around the house? Who might you be talking to? Those kinds of things, just to give the folks joining us kind of an idea of what the work actually looks like in practice.
who do you want to choose?
I'm looking at your
Pick one.
faces. I'm looking at your faces. How about Nina? Let's go with you. Your smile was real big when I just looked at it.
No, it's all over the joint, right? You start, normally when I go into a home, first thing I do is check the client, because I want to know where the client is at, which generally will help me to see where the family is at or where their loved ones are at. And then sort of talk about what I'm seeing so that I'm educating while I'm looking, and then answer questions. And then if the client is sleepy or unresponsive, it gives me an opportunity to check in with the family and really see how they are doing. So there's that emotional aspect, and again, the education. And then it's, what do you need? What is it that you need right now? Or I'm here I can be here as long as you want. And I'm a ritualist as well. And so I do a lot of ritual with folks before their person dies, and ritual after their person dies. And sometimes they just need to focus. It's I've had families be sitting vigil, but they're not even engaged with their person. They're engaged with each other, talking about whatever's going on in their lives. And so oftentimes I'll pull out, I have a stethoscope that I pull out, and I'll say, "Would you like to listen to your mom's heartbeat? It's probably the first thing you ever heard, and maybe you'd like to hear it one more time before she dies." And all of a sudden, everybody, it's just like, boom, they're there. And that's where we want them. And so it can be that kind of work. It can be cleaning up in the kitchen. It can be making tea for whoever's sitting bedside. So it's all over the board. It just depends on what you walk into, and I'm willing to do just about anything. So,
And also where they're receiving care, right? Like it's gonna look different if they're receiving care in a hospice home or in a hospital versus their own home, something like that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I know we're really close to the end, so I want to see if we can get Nina or Gail, if one of you wants to talk about a day in the life, and then we'll kind of wrap up.
I just wanted to add one thing.
Please.
The idea of just simply breathing.
Mm.
So many times people are in their heads and they're so worried and nervous and all kinds of other emotions going that they forget to breathe literally. And so I usually try to hold their hands and just breathe with me. And then, however long that takes to settle people down. The other thing is if they have an animal companion, I always look at that because I think the animals reveal what's going on in the family. And so that's another barometer for me.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I did see someone in the chat talk about ritual, which ties to some other questions that are in the Q&A that we will respond to, because I think we probably can do some describing of rituals, maybe link to some information about them. So thank you all for asking those questions. And thank you so much. Okay, so I thank you all for the questions. We are running out of time, so I want to make sure we get to resources so you can see how to get a hold of our doulas. We'll share a little bit here about the Minnesota campaign, and then all of the responses to the questions that we have in the Q&A. Nina and Gail and Barbara and I will write some answers, and everybody who registered will get that written out in a document, and they'll also get a link to this recording. So resources. This is if you want to take a quick picture of this, you can. Certainly, like I said, when you get the copy of this recording, you'll see this. We'll also have these written out in the resources, but if you want it right now, I want you to have it right now. So this is how you get a hold of Nina or Gail or Barbara sometime in the next 2 weeks if you'd like to get a hold of them before our next email correspondence with you. And I'm going to move real quickly on to Dr. Thoman to give us a little update on Minnesota, and then we'll all say goodbye, and I'll thank our panelists. But I want to go to you first, Dr. Thoman.
Oh, thank you for giving me a few minutes. Thanks to all of you on the call who are involved in the Minnesota campaign, and that is the campaign to pass the End of Life Options Act, which would authorize medical aid in dying for terminally ill people. And if you pay any attention to the news, you know that the bill has been moving. This is a picture of all the great volunteers who came to the very first hearing. It's now been through 3 committees in the House, moving to the 4th committee, and we have yet to have movement in the Senate. So if you are supportive of this and you would like to get involved, I invite you to sign up on our website. You can also email your lawmakers, and especially Senator Melissa Wickland, who is the chair of the Health Committee and is the one who will decide whether or not our bill gets a hearing in the Senate. And then finally, also reach out to the governor. So make your voice heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thoman. Thank you, thank you. And I'll do my little pitch that I'm sure you all expected if you've been to one before, because Compassion and Choices really is funded almost exclusively by individual donors. So if more webinars like this and more resources and more incredible advocacy matters to you, please consider sending us a donation. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for being with us today. I want to thank our panelists, not just for the hour they just spent with us, but for the last few weeks of coordinating this with me, of the work that they'll do with me as we put together some answers for all of you and compile information to share back with you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the share so we can really see everybody for a moment. So I just want to thank our panelists again and thank all of you for joining us. It's clear that people want to learn about this work. I am blown away by the number of people not only that registered, but that actually joined us today. So thank you so much. This is just the beginning. You can continue to get in touch with us. We will be in touch with you. And feel free when we send those follow-up emails, if you have questions, you can reply to me and ask them, and I'll try to get you answers wherever I can. So thank you all so much for being with us. Thank you to our panelists. If you want to say anything as we wrap up.
I have one last thing.
Please.
I have something that I wrote for one of my books. You are part of a greater energy. You are not alone. You are safe and you are deeply loved. You matter to me.
Thank you so much, Barbara. It was beautiful. Thank you to all of you. I really, really appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you.